Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan.
This week ending the 28th of March 2025. We've got a very full show for you today. We're going to talk about adolescence, toxic masculinity, Ben Scallon's appeal to the opposite sex, Sarah's speech at the Chamber of Commerce, the ongoing row in the Dáil, Donald Trump's problems with Signal, immigration protests in the west of Ireland, prostitution reviews by government, and an innovative new gender policy by Scouting Ireland. Before I say hello to Sarah, just two things. First of all, I've been told on this podcast I'm speaking too quickly and my voice is being trailing off, or you can't hear me properly. So I'm going to try and speak really slowly. And secondly, I do have a little bit of a cold. So if I'm sniffly at any point, please forgive me. That all said, Sarah, how are you?
I'm fine. You know, another week, John. Another week.
Another week. It was an action-packed week. I enjoyed this week. Mainly because we talked about on the podcast last week, very briefly, we talked about this new Netflix TV show, Adolescence, if you remember. And at that stage, neither of us watched it. And then, of course, Ben Scallon was on RTE1 on Monday night because, basically the media have gone ham on this. They've gone big. And everyone needs to watch it. Everyone needs to tell their kids about it. It should be mandatory in schools. And we need kids everywhere watching this show to stop young boys becoming toxic masculine males. So I know you haven't watched it, but I sat down and I watched it there in full. I thought it was brilliant. But I also think the media conversation around it is absolutely insane because it doesn't actually reflect, to my eyes, what's actually in the show. This whole business of it's a young boy who kills somebody, that is true. But like what nobody's talking about is the extent to which in the show that horrible act is motivated by a sustained campaign of bullying against him, ironically by young girls. And I think a thing that's being missed in all of this, and I wanted your thoughts on it, is that it seems to me that all we talk about is like the impact of young boys on the internet, or the impact of the internet on young boys, I should say. But in actual fact, the internet, if you wanted to design a tool that was perfectly suited to the kinds of bullying behavior that are actually much more common amongst young girls, like isolation, meanness, name calling, etc. You couldn't do much better than to invent Instagram, Snapchat, and WhatsApp, could you?
No, I'm very grateful all the time that I didn't grow up in an era where social media existed. But I did go to an all-girls school and had my own fair share of interactions with female bullying of different kinds, which I think probably most women have, and still have the scars. And so I think, like the way in which the kind of warfare that women will wield on each other. I was going to say when they're teenagers, but I think a lot of it goes on for life. Some women never grow out of it. I'm sorry to say. I mean, most of the women that I know who are adults who will have had, bullying in work, bullying in adult female social groups, or adult social groups, I should say, 9 times out of 10 it'll be inflicted on them by a woman. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. Some women, stay in that adolescent female warfare for life.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're I again haven't watched it, but I think you're absolutely right to call it out. And I'm not surprised at all, because isn't this the way we are? Which is that the focus will be on the boy, the incel, what needs to be trained out of the boys, arising from that TV show. And I'm taking your word for it that there's a lot of female bullying in it, but I haven't seen one mention out of that anywhere except from you.
Well, it's because how it's presented in the show. And I'm going to, if you are somebody who's planning to watch the show, maybe tonight or tomorrow night or whatever, warning, there are going to be spoilers in what I say. I don't want to be an asshole about that. So you've had your warning. If you want to skip forward or whatever, I'm going to start talking about it now. But essentially, I mean, when I say there's female bullying in the show, we don't see it. It's not depicted on screen. But basically what we're given is, a terrible murder of a young girl has been committed, and the show takes us through 4 stages of the investigation. Him being arrested, to an investigation in school, to a psychological assessment, to at the end, the impact on his family. And over the course of those 4 episodes, the background to his story is slowly unveiled. And here's a bright young kid who's 12, 13. He has gotten it into his head, as kids of that age sometimes do, that they're not good at anything, that they're not attractive, that they're ugly, that nobody will ever like. And essentially what happens is he goes and he asks this girl out, and she says no. And more to that, she then starts going onto his Instagram pages to comment on his pictures, basically calling him an incel and saying, you'll never be attractive and all that sort of stuff. And the guy, completely in the wrong, but nevertheless, this is what provokes him to lash out. I'm not trying to victim blame here against this fictional young dead girl. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying that, I'm surprised that none of the commentary around the show has focused on that element. There are other elements too. There are about how the victim in question had her nudes shared, for example, amongst kids in class. And the whole thing is all about how the toxicity of social media on kids in general. And yet it's being whipped up by the media into this one story. And you and I have discussed Andrew Tate at length in this podcast. And I don't propose to do it again, except to say that if you listen to us, you know that we're not fans, nor will we ever be. But the media whipping this up into this is the only message. It's about keep your boys away from Andrew Tate, keep your boys away from Conor McGregor, keep your boys away from the manosphere. And there's no talk at all about the fact that this is very much a bi-gender thing. First of all, it's happening with young girls as well. And sometimes young girls are the ringleaders of it. And secondly, that it's much broader than simply he listened to the wrong influencer online. It's much more a case of here's silent bullying going on in this kid's room when he's locked away from this one. So I thought it was an absolutely brilliant program. It's brilliantly acted. It's brilliantly put together. The filmmaking, you need to watch it, I think, for the filmmaking alone. You'd be blown away by that or nothing else. But I do think, and I think I've read an awful lot of stuff on the political right over the last week from people kind of going, oh, it's propaganda. They're feeding us this, that, and that. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's what the actual show does. I think a lot of the media stuff, though, surrounding has verged on the propaganda.
Yeah, well, obviously I haven't watched it, so I can't speak to that. I do think there's elements of propaganda in the manner in which it's discussed and the messaging, the line that the media have taken on it. And everything I've seen in social media has been about blaming the boy. This should be mandatory viewing. Parents of boys should watch this. And it's, again, as always, about training the toxicity, the natural inclination towards toxicity out of our boys, which I oppose in the strongest way possible. As I've said before on this podcast, I deeply resent the idea that I have to train that kind of toxicity out of my boys as if it's some kind of natural thing. And I deeply resent the sort of shallowness of the conversations where the media and people on social media arrive at this juncture in our story, kind of perplexed as to how these boys, in their minds, boys kind of got like this. But I would argue, who made it this way? Because we've had 10 years of telling boys there's things wrong with them. They have no identity. They've mixed messaging all the time. Don't objectify women, but also Lily Phillips is great, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's no wonder their brains are fried, they're lost, and they end up following people like Andrew Tate. Because on the one hand, what is natural to a lot of boys, not all, but a lot of boys, is a feeling that they want to grow up and be protectors, is a feeling of masculinity. And when you're 12 and 13, you're kind of grappling with all these things. And all you ever hear of is that some of the things that come naturally to you are wrong and bad and should be trained out of you. And that, look at these girls on Instagram who are half naked, but don't objectify them, only if they objectify themselves. And even when they objectify themselves, they're still the victim somehow and you're bad. And all of this constant negative imagery around being boys, that is it any wonder that Andrew Tate, whatever about what you think about Andrew Tate is a creation of this culture, this anti-male culture. He's a landing place for boys who are lost. Who wanted it this way? The media. Who created him? The media.
The UK government did research last year into sort of attitudes to kind of sex activities amongst kids. And I mean, by kids, I don't mean 8-year-olds. I mean like 12 and upwards, adolescents, essentially. And not creepy research, not the kind of research, nothing inappropriate about it. They were just literally trying to find out what's happening amongst kids. And The Economist magazine last year quoted what I thought was one of the most poignant things I've ever read. And it was from a young boy. And the young boy was 14 or so. And basically, they'd all been asked to fill out these anonymous surveys about kind of like, did they think they were old to engage in sexual activity? did they have apprehensions about it? And this one 14-year-old boy had filled out basically saying that his girlfriend was pressuring him into sexual activity, but he didn't want to do it because he loved her too much to choke her. And he had gotten the impression from the internet that this was sort of a mandatory, this whole business of choking. And that is not that is not something you can blame Andrew Tate for. That is something you can blame the porn industry for. And frankly, without being gross about it, a lot of young women on the internet who purport to, on the one hand, sell this stuff as normal, and on the other hand, then complain about the violence of young men. And here you had a 14-year-old boy, and it says this is the Economist, and you can go and read the report, who was saying, I love my girlfriend, I really like her, I don't want to do this sort of stuff. But yes, that's the message that's being sent to kids. So it's not only the Andrew Tate stuff, that's what I would suggest, and it's not only young boys. Because that particular young boy is motivated by compassion for his girlfriend or a girl.
Yeah, well, I mean, but I think a lot of boys, men, aren't, don't like that stuff, aren't interested in that stuff. And this comes down to what we're coming to is the tail end of a period of just scrambling boys' minds with, as you say, porn, objectify women, but don't objectify women, all of this. And the result is this. And then I do think that the commentary around this Adolescence TV show is more propaganda because it's reinforcing, again, nothing about the girl, nothing about how he might have gotten this way. And again, like you say, not victim blaming or whatever, but just, like I always say, just having a very, very superficial, shallow conversation about some of these themes without actually diving into them in any great depth. They're complicated. There's two genders, sorry, but there is. And those genders bring their own issues, bring their own difficulties in adolescence to the table. And we victimize women or the girls completely and blame the boys completely. And it's not really working out very well. And we need to rethink that. And adolescence, in my view, is just reinforcing the same old tropes, the same old stereotypes about boys without actually challenging anything or thinking or doing any real thinking about it in any great depth.
Yeah, well, I reiterate that I agree with you that the coverage of it is doing. I don't think that's what the show does, in fairness.
Yeah.
You said something interesting there before we move on to the discussion on RTE. You said we're at the tail end of it. Do you think it's getting better? Do you think we've reached because I don't. I think it's getting worse. I don't mean to be a complete pessimist. I think it's getting worse and it's going to get worse.
I think I don't know if it's getting better, but I think it's at its peak. I don't think it's going to get any worse than it is now. I think that more and more people are waking up to it. More and more women, I think, are seeing, the hypocrisy of it. More and more people are becoming more, I think, simply more aware of the mixed messaging and the unfairness to the messaging that they're getting from the media. I hope, but I think maybe I'm wishful thinking, but I think we're at the worst of it.
No, I think it can always get worse. And I think it's likely to get worse. That's my take. I mean, I think if you look at the general trajectory of the culture, one of the things that I would say when I would discuss this is that traditionally people like me, who serve no purpose at all in society as social conservatives, but one of the purposes we served was to essentially be a morality break. You had the political right that was there saying, promoting one man, one woman marriage. Don't have sex until they get married. Just be traditional and all the rest of it. And that's kind of gone out the window now. The political right has kind of given up on that sort of stuff. And there are very few breaks on this, to the extent that those breaks that are there are kind of, you and I have discussed trad wives on the show, for example. And I think one of the things about the trad wife movement is the way so much of it is kind of almost presented in pitched to men as have a particular vision of femininity and womanhood, and how pornified some, not all, some of that is. I think we're moving into this more and more like the complete capture of society by the pornographic industry. To the extent that you can't sell perfume without that particular imagery, I think is making it worse. And I think it's also driving demand for more and more extreme content. And I think when you see people like Lily Phillips doing the stuff that she's been doing, for example, to get attention. The things that she has to do to get attention are not so extreme that you wonder what her replacement will have to do. And yeah, I just don't see it getting any better all by itself. The culture is not going to heal itself. There's going to have to be some kind of action or movement to heal the culture, and I really don't know what that is. So yeah, I'm more of a pessimist. We've lost God, Sarah. We've lost God. He says as the agnostic himself. But that's the basic point.
Fair enough. Well, we will see. We will see. I'm the optimist. You're not. But look, ever hopeful, John. Ever hopeful.
What did you make of my dear colleague Ben becoming the thinking woman's crumpet during the week? Did you see that?
Well, live long enough to become the villain or the hero or whatever that expression is. So, Ben is suddenly the darling of women. Is that what you're saying?
Some women I saw it online. So some of you women online need to roll those tongues back in. Just saying that.
We're allowed to talk about Ben whatever way we like because he's our friend. But I thought he was great, but I thought it was really interesting. So for people who don't know, it was RTE up front, and obviously they were discussing Adolescence, but there was this piece in it, and it was clipped, and it's everywhere on Twitter. I saw it. People can look it up if they want. But Owen Cleary, is that his name?
Yes.
He was talking about they were talking about toxic masculinity, and he was talking about masculinity, and he was basically saying he didn't want masculinity. He wasn't comfortable with the concepts of masculinity, and he didn't want to be a protector of women. And basically, it kind of the camera then panned to the audience. There was this wonderful shot where there was 3 young women kind of sitting there, and it was like the ick heard around the world. You just saw their 3 facial expressions, kind of going, "Huh," And I mean, again, I honestly believe that the majority of women don't like the idea of a man saying, "I've no interest in being your protector." I mean, if you just take on basic biological terms, first of all, I've been pregnant many times, so that makes you, a lot of the time, for most women, physically vulnerable and probably financially vulnerable, right, when you have a baby. And the idea of, say, just the first part, being physically vulnerable and somebody breaking into the house and Keith turning to me and going, "Oh my God, there's noise downstairs. Here's the baseball bat. Will you go down?" is ick to me, right? I don't, I couldn't be married to somebody that I felt like I still had to bring my dad to physically protect me. Sorry. But then also that women who are pregnant are financially vulnerable. So this idea, this guy who thinks he's being really progressive, and goes back to what we were talking about with young men and the mixed messaging. He thinks he's being really progressive, and he thinks he's kind of saying something that the girls are all kind of going to go, "Wow, he's so progressive," or whatever. But this is a rock I'll die in. Women don't like that.
Well, some of them do. Some of them will go for that old kind of I'm so sensitive, I'm a feminist, all genders are equal, and oh my God, I'm such an ally. So I'm not suggesting, not making
they do, John. Do you know what? And then when they're sorting out who's getting on the lifeboats, I tell you, they remember the old rules pretty fast. Or if there's conscription for a war, they remember those rules pretty fast. And I'm telling you now that when breaking glass is heard from the bedroom upstairs and there's a baseball bat between them, those bitches don't get out of bed to go down and tackle the guy on the stairs. Trust me. So they say what they think they're supposed to say. But the truth of the matter is that most women, and listen, there's exceptions to everything, but most women, particularly women who are thinking about marrying someone and having kids or whatever, are not, find that unattractive. That is a rock I will die on. Yeah. And you could see it. It was written all over their faces.
Well, Ben had basically done it, and I've teased him about this to him. I'm not teasing him in public in a mean way, but Ben had basically done his kind of man strong, man make fire, man donk animal overhead with club. Yes. Yeah. His definition of masculinity, which look, I get what he's trying to say. I'm not mocking him. I do think that's...
and he is, and I say this, we don't have to keep saying it, we're his friend. He's an alpha. He's definitely an alpha. He wants to be an alpha. That's his job. That's fine. But he's right in the sense that that's why he's become, you know, women thirsting after him, to use your expression, like on the internet, because women do prefer that kind of. I mean, I'm not even sure like how deeply women are thinking about it in the beginning. But if I went on a date with a guy who was like, just so you know, I just don't think I believe in equality, and you know, I'm not interested. I don't think masculinity is me protecting you, or you know, blah blah blah.
Well, I'll give you my answer. Not that it would have been very different to Ben's answer, and probably wouldn't have gone down as well. And it's not probably the answer I would have given had I been on TV, in fairness. But like, to be masculine is to kind of accept your own disposability. Like, when you're a man, you have to accept, first of all, you know, if there's a war, there's a reason why the men are sent to fight. And it is not actually because we're bigger and stronger, although that is an obvious benefit. But one of the reasons is that societies can rebuild without the men. They can't rebuild without the women. Women are an essential to produce the next generation. Men are essential to some degree, but they're slightly an optional extra. And so that is what you, as a man, you are expected to be the one who puts your life in danger to protect. Because, you know, it is, as in every mammalian, the next generation is the most important. And so as a man, it is your job to do the more dangerous things. It is your job to be the provider and the shelterer and the protector, because ultimately you are the more disposable. And that's a thing that's just not talked about, because people are like, oh, with the modern era, with parenting and everything, it's like everything is equal. And no, there's a reason why the courts unfairly in some cases tend to put kids with mothers. There's a reason why most mothers tend to pursue custody more aggressively than men. It is because biologically we are attuned to the fact that the woman is the most important nurturer of the next generation, and the man is the kind of protector, but he's also disposable. And I think that's something that a lot of men struggle to get their heads around. But it's my view of it for what it's worth.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that you know, I've had 3 children, and you know, Keith and I would have that kind of, I'm sure lots of couples have it, conversation about when you're having a baby, like, oh, you know, this kind of dilemma. I'm sure it's a conversation people often have, which is, you know, if something goes wrong, you save the mother or the baby. And I used to always be like, if I wake up and you've saved me over the baby, I'll kill you. And he used to be like, oh, you know, and you'd have this kind of horrible like conversation. But if I was gone, I mean, the children would hopefully survive on McDonald's and with no clean clothes, and you know, somehow make it to adulthood. But the truth is that most women that I know are more of a primary parent. I mean, you can talk equality all you like, but like at the end of the day, are more responsible for the household stuff, the rearing of the children, children's emotional needs, children's physical needs, children's health needs. You know, most of the time, more women do more of that than men. But you know, by the way, this goes the other way as well, because now I do feel like she's gone a bit mad in the last while. But you know, as you know, I used to be a big fan of Candace Owens, and back in the day, and Candace Owens does this bit, and I really agree with it, about make him a sandwich, you know, and like this whole kind of, you know, make your husband a sandwich. So yeah, I am happy to make Keith a sandwich, and Keith never makes his own sandwiches, and I always make Keith sandwiches, right? He'll never make his own sandwich again. But if somebody breaks into the house, I expect him to go down the stairs with a baseball bat. Like, there are just things that I do better than he does, from parenting, in life, in physicality. There's just things that he's better at than I am, and vice versa. And I think most women feel that way. And I think that was shown in that TV show. They were accidentally trying to have a conversation about toxic masculinity, but God bless that cameraman, whoever he is, who turned the camera around to the faces of those women, because that was the most honest shot I've seen on RTE in about 10 years.
Do you know, you said something, I agree with you entirely, everything else you said. I'm not, it's not that I was waiting to make this point, I just want to go back to it, where you said that thing about, you know, how if they'd had to choose between you and the baby, you would have picked the baby. And it's interesting, because as you were saying it, I was thinking, as a man, were I in that position, absolutely every time you pick your wife. Absolutely every time. Because I guess you're like, it must be that there's something primal at the back of your head that kind of goes, oh, we can always have a baby. That's horrible. But like, and it's funny that your instinct was completely different to mine there. I just thought maybe I'm unique. Maybe you can all say I'm the only one.
But the thing is that, like, the thing is that Keith would say that he'd choose me, but I think a lot of women, if they were to choose between their husband and the child, would choose the child.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
But that goes back to my point about men being disposable. I would expect that to be the natural reaction of a woman. I would expect that, and I wouldn't hold it against her. I'd expect that the mother
like,
would choose the child.
I'd want Keith to pick the child, but he probably wouldn't. Whereas Keith would want, I would pick the child.
Yes, and Keith would want you to pick him. Yeah, I
don't
know.
I've never asked him, actually. I should ask him after.
Maybe not this stage, but at that theoretical stage. Look, let's move on. We've talked about this at long last. Hope you found it interesting. If you've been listening, I think it's been an interesting conversation. You spoke at the Chamber of Commerce in Dublin, wasn't it? During the week. This year, flying very high to get invitations to the Chamber of Commerce.
Well, it was held in the Dublin Chamber of Commerce, but anyway, yes, it was an event. Myself, Nick Delahanty, Professor Jared Casey, and Cormac Lucy spoke. The topic was about, is Ireland at breaking point? It was really good. It was well attended. A lot of very, very man heavy, but that's fine. Probably self-explanatory. You know, I think men are feeling the effects of our culture earlier than women. As Nick Delahanty said, really, really, like, perfectly, he said, you know, we're not wrong, we're just early. And a lot of the guys there are like, and I spoke to some of them afterwards, they're just feeling very kind of lost in culture. But Cormac Lucy spoke about the economy, like, is Ireland at breaking point in terms of the economy? And then I spoke about this kind of stuff, how we treat our boys, NGOs, cowardice, political cowardice, media cowardice. Nick spoke about the political structures, and then Jared Casey spoke about immigration. It was really good. It was really interesting. We need to have more events like that, I think. Just people sitting in a room, trashing out, going a bit deeper into some of these hard conversations that people on the media airwaves, apart from Gript and a couple of notable exceptions, are just people in media and in public life are just not willing to have.
That line that we're not wrong, we're just early, I think is a very good one. Fairness to Nick, who has, you know, I want to say in relation to Nick, and I don't mean this in a bad way, because Nick is doing phenomenal work. But it's also work that, you know, my colleague Matt Tracy has done an awful lot of originally, and he and Nick are doing. But it's phenomenally, and it's an important work. And every single week on Gript, our most read stories are the stories on Matt Tracy. Every single week. I could write the best opinion piece that's ever been written. Like Cicero couldn't write an opinion piece better than the one I could theoretically write, and it would still not be as read or as popular with the readers as what Matt is revealing about the various individuals who are making tens of millions of euro providing accommodation to asylum seekers in this country. And I have never seen the public. We have a lot of readers. We're not a small outlet. You know, our audience is comparable to that of the journal.ie. There's a lot of people who read Gript every day. And I can tell you, I see who the most popular writer is, what the most popular stories are, and it's Matt Tracy on all of them. And all Matt is doing is going through and exposing, or exposing might even be the wrong word, but in some cases he has to expose it because there's so many shell companies and things hidden behind, you know, legal entities and so on. But going back and showing who these people are, who are walking away with massive piles of cash, hundreds of millions of euro in the case of people like the Seamus the Banty McEnany, the former Monaghan manager, hundreds of millions of euro flowing into these people's accounts for taking over hotels that used to be community amenities and turning them into asylum centres. And this week, the reason I'm mentioning is that it's now moved into the Gaeltacht. There's this protest in Carna, in County Galway, in Connemara, where a hotel there in the Gaeltacht area is there, where they speak Irish 24/7. I know it because I was at Coláiste Youssef, which is the name of their Gaeltacht college in the summer for 3 summers when I was a teenager. A great place, fond memories. Well, who has fond memories of the Gaeltacht?
Yeah.
Teenager, but like as fond of memories as one can have of the Gaeltacht. And this is one of their hotels that's been taken over, and people are protesting 24/7 around the clock. And what bugged me was that while this was happening, what were they fighting about in the Oireachtas? 6 minutes speaking time for the government. And I mean, they're all at it. It's all Patrick Tabine, who should know better, like making a big speech on this. I saw Michael Collins fighting with Matty McGraw. Like, what are they doing?
Well, let's just roll back a second. First of all, as you know, I'm a big fan of Matt Tracy, and I think you're absolutely right in what he's saying, and Nick, that they do amazing work.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to take away from what Nick did there. I want to emphasize that. I just want to say that Matt sometimes doesn't get the recognition I think he deserves.
You're right. But, and this isn't to diminish what they're doing, but what I would also say that's what's slightly depressing about it is that what they're doing is journalism in its natural, originally intended form. And it stands out to us, and it's most read, and it's acknowledged, and it's appreciated because it's rare. Because, we appreciate, and it used to be the case that journalists would deep dive into things, would research things, would really go into things and provide a story at the end of it where they'd done the work to be able to help the person who read the story do the thinking. And we don't get that as much anymore. We're really let down, I think, by a lot of our media outlets, by a lot of our newspapers. I talked about this at the Chamber of Commerce, just talking about how, the idea behind the media used to be, or should be, that the media is a watchdog for the public, and that the media keeps an eye on different things, and that the public isn't being let down by the political classes or any other classes in any way, shape or form. And what we've ended up with, instead of having a watchdog, our media has become a guard dog for the status quo, and they protect the status quo and themselves at all costs. And it's not that, it's not that you will see journalists going into political advisory roles, that's the problem. That's the symptom of the problem, that you have been such a good lapdog, or such a good guard dog for the status quo for so long, that now your prize is a job. And, I guarantee you, and you, I'm sure, would agree, that Matt Tracy or Nick Delahanty is not going to be offered any government advisory roles anytime soon. No one would ever give them a job. And that tells you that should be everything you need to know about the style of journalism that's going on there. And then to your later point about the carry on and the Dáil, I mean, I'm a political nerd, so are you, and I don't care anymore about what they're doing. I don't care anymore about speaking time. I think the carry on behaving like, Verona is right, making a holy show of themselves, and just nobody cares. The public doesn't care. I turn on my TV and Donald Trump is talking about what his plans are for the Irish pharmaceutical industry. And I turn on the other channel and I look at our Irish Parliament, and they're carrying on like it's like a circus of Muppets, all shouting and roaring at each other about nothing. No one in the public cares about that issue. Nobody cares about your speaking time. You might have had a point weeks ago, but we're weeks and weeks into this Dáil, and you're an absolute disgrace. And can you just move on with your lives? Seriously.
It really is. It is. And like, I just don't know. I don't know. I'm baffled. As you say, you and I are political nerds, right?
Yeah.
I understand opinion polling. I understand, politicians doing focus groups. I understand all that. They cannot be doing any of it. There is no way that there is any opinion polling out there, any data that these politicians have that says to them, the public really wants you now to push this speaking rights thing in the law. It is just insanity. It's a complete loss of all perspective. Like, people are sitting at home and they're worried about the price of diesel. They're worried about their kids in school. They're worried about people in hospital traveling. They're worried about immigration. They're worried about what's going on in the world. And you clowns are jumping up and down because some TDs who aren't you are getting a few minutes extra speaking time in the Dáil. And then you'll have the people who defend them. There'll be at least one person in the comments below this on YouTube who's like, no, this is an unprecedented attack on democracy, John. It's a disgrace, so it is, John. The government can't be let away with it, so they can't, John. Get over yourself. I do not care. And I don't see why anyone would care if a couple of government backbenchers get to ask ministers a question every day. That is not the biggest problem in the country. Maybe it's, would I vote for it if I was in the Dáil? Probably not. Would I be jumping up and down? Absolutely not. I would be jumping up and down about the stuff that really matters, like the Irish state trying to force a bunch of migrants who speak neither Irish nor English into a Gaeltacht community, which we as taxpayers have funded for years for the preservation of the Irish language and Irish culture. You're putting migrants in there who don't even speak the language and whose second language is likely to be English. And that is ultimately cannot but undermine the Irishness of one of the few Gaeltacht communities left in the country from governments who say that they care about protecting this stuff. And you're talking about speaking rights in the Dáil. Would you go away and shite?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Pretty
I
much.
just,
Yeah. And I mean, I really did think that Sinn Féin and the opposition after that general election would have learnt their lesson, upped their game, and, really come into this Dáil term swinging and calling this government out on some of this stuff. And they're worse than ever.
and then the whole kind of, see the whole Michael Lowry gave me the finger thing from Paul Murphy.
Michael Lowry did give him the finger. I watched the video of it. He is giving him the finger.
Yeah.
He's a disgrace. But like the whole anybody who was interested in seeing that, or anybody who has an interest in that, saw that video for themselves. He did give him the finger, and don't insult our intelligence by saying you were beckoning him towards you. I mean, does he think?
He did give him, like, to be honest with you, I thought maybe I'm an asshole.
Finger.
I thought it was funny. It was like, Paul Murphy, is this phone out in the Dáil? He's videoing. He's going, and he's like he's still in UCD. He's still on the UCD concourse. He's still trying to boycott Nestle or Coke or whatever, or start the revolution from Belfield, which is all he's ever done. Just a little loser. And he's waving his phone around going, shame, shame, shame. And Michael Lowry gives him two fingers. And I want, like, the first and only time in my entire life, I've never wanted to shake Michael Lowry's hand. Fair play. That's what I thought. Like, so there.
You're just glad that somebody gave the finger to Paul, to whatever his name is.
It's not personal. It's just that, like, grow up, Paul. Like, that whole the chanting, the chants, the slogans, and the phone and the video and in people's face. It was effective 20 years ago when you were a student politician on Belfield trying to impress the girls by being the most radical of the lot, right? It's 2025. You're a man in your middle 40s with a child. Grow up. That's my opinion. Other people will be very angry with me for holding that opinion. Other people will say, I should grow up. Whatever. That's my opinion. That's why we're here.
No, I think your opinion can be right about Paul Murphy, but I don't think, I think it's a separate issue. I think that Michael Lowry kind of sneering and laughing and giving the two fingers is also just disgraceful.
We'll agree to disagree. I'm not saying, obviously. Do you know what? It's like the whole, I'm always accused of Trump derangement syndrome because I'm like, he does not set a good example for your children. Michael Lowry does not set a good example for anyone's children. They should teach your children not to give people the finger and so on. But on this particular instance, I'm inclined to pass. That's all I'm saying. Speaking of Donald Trump, what was your opinion on the whole Signal controversy over there?
I don't know. Storm in a teacup. Another pearl clutching by everyone else thing. What's yours, John? Because, I'm sure you have one.
I actually don't think it's that big a deal. I think the reaction to it is much worse than the actual crime. And I mean the reaction by people who defend the Trump administration. I think the actual issue, which is, Signal is a pretty secure app. I use it. I use it for contacts with sensitive sources. So, for example, almost any journalist in this country who ever has any dealings with people in the security sector, for example, will use Signal because it is secure, it's encrypted, and the messages can be set to. So it's a pretty secure app. It's not as secure, obviously, as the US secure intelligence facilities or whatever. But here's my thought on this. This was a mess up. They put a journalist into a group chat with a bunch of senior administration officials discussing material that shouldn't have been on Signal. They got caught, they got busted, and then the reaction was kind of a little bit hysterical. And I think one of the problems, I'm often accused of Trump derangement syndrome because I'm critical of him. I think there's another form of Trump derangement syndrome where people do not hold him to the same standards that they would hold other presidents. I think that if this has happened during the Biden administration and you had a bunch of senior Biden administration officials like Tony Blinken or Lloyd Austin, who was the Secretary of Defense, all in a group chat, accidentally sending details of sensitive US military operations to Fox News, then I think it would have been agreed that this was borderline treason, if not incompetence, and all those people should retire and resign, and everyone would be on the entire different side than the one they are now. And that's the only point I really want to make, which is that I think, people should try and judge situations objectively, and I don't think they always do where this White House is concerned.
Well, I don't think you're often accused of having Trump derangement syndrome for any other reason than you do have Trump derangement syndrome.
Oh, so
No,
let's just...
I think if that had happened with a Biden administration, I can hand on heart say I wouldn't have cared. Like, I would have felt the same way, that it wasn't that big of a deal. And I think that it wouldn't have happened with a Trump Biden or in a Biden administration, because Biden probably, in fairness to him, probably wasn't able to use the mobile phone for probably the last 2 years of his term. But look, there's definitely a situation where people are give too many free passes, because of the side they're on. But in the defense of people who are Trump supporters, who you feel like they support everything or whatever, a lot of those people were gaslit for years about Trump, about Biden. Not so long ago, John, we were told there was absolutely nothing wrong with Biden, and people were told to just ignore what was right in front of their eyes. And, Trump and Biden was given a free pass on multiple things. You could say equally that the pardons that Biden gave his family, if they'd been given by Trump to his family, they would have been out. So it goes both ways. What you're talking about is the symptom of polarized politics, which we've been living in for a very long time. And
I know.
Go on.
I'm not saying that. I'm not. Of course, we live in a polarized politics. Of course, people are polarized. I just think it's our job to help people be smarter. And I think when you realize you live in a polarized society, one way to be smarter is to step back and say, am I being polarized here? And how would I react if the shoe was on the other foot? Because that might give you some sense of the truth might be in the middle. Okay. If you're defending it absolutely because your guys did it, and you'd be attacking absolutely if the other guys did it, then you're just what they call in computer gaming an NPC, a non-player character. You're just there to perform a role. You're not thinking for yourself. You're letting other people do your thinking for you, which I think is wrong. Yeah,
but what you're saying is that, you take a step back and you say, oh, well, this and well, that, but at the same time, it's not that. Yeah, the truth is in the middle on lots of things, and there's nuance and there's complications. All the big topics we talk about on this podcast, and all the big topics that polarize people, none of them are simple, because if they were simple, they wouldn't be so polarizing. There'd be an answer, and that'd be it, right? But at the same time, a lot of people, myself included, it's not about, the truth is in the middle, but the pendulum swung so far in one direction that it's very difficult to give up any territory when you're in the battle to push it back the other direction a bit. Even if you're trying to get it in your mind, you're trying to get it to the middle. It's very hard to concede territory because it feels so hard to make any ground going back the other way. And I appreciate that there's people who've been sitting at home for years, as I said, being gaslit, feeling like nobody spoke for them. And now it's just really, really difficult. That it may get easier over time, but in the early days, which we are, of Trump's presidency, for a lot of people, it's just too early for them to concede any territory because they were just
but I don't
pushed
think you
the
have
other
to
way or
concede
gaslit for so long.
I think it's as simple as saying senior officials probably shouldn't use Signal for top secret operations. That's it. I mean, and I think in fairness, I'm not trying to fight with my listeners here, because I think most of them agree. I think. I don't want to get on the wrong side. If we want to get into my Trump derangement syndrome, we could talk about the insanity of tariffs, but I don't think we had that on the list. So we'll move on to something else. Because you said something about, I can't remember, you had said something that gave me a really good hook for this, and I've forgotten what it was, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Scouting Ireland, because I know this is a topic that's close to your heart. And I don't do a lot of news reporting at Gript. I mainly do opinion, but somebody sent me an email at the weekend, and they basically said, and obviously I'm not going to reveal this person's name, but they attended Larch Hill, which is basically Scouting Ireland's main camping and conference facilities in the Wicklow Mountains, at the weekend. And this person is what's called a scouter, Sarah. And a scouter is essentially an adult who works with Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, where you go along with them on their events, you help them get their badges or whatever the Scouts do, and you go on their away weekends and so on. And this was a weekend for adult scouters, where they were basically being walked through the new safeguarding policy of Scouting Ireland. Safeguarding obviously is all to do with child safety and child protection, child abuse, and all that sort of good stuff. And this person who contacted me was absolutely horrified, because at that event, they were essentially told that as part of the new policy, the new safeguarding policy, which is coming in at the end of this year, Scouting Ireland will be basically adopting a literal definition of the Irish Gender Recognition Act, which is to say that if you tell Scouting Ireland that you are a girl, then you are a girl. And if you tell them you're a boy, then you are a boy. And biological sex does not matter. And you do not, according to my understanding of what was outlined at Large Hill, you do not even have to have a gender recognition certificate. It is a simple matter of self-identification. So where this becomes a problem is not actually with kids, even though that policy will apply with kids. It is when it comes to supervision. This is a voluntary organization. And for example, if you have a bunch of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts who are going away on a weekend, they're going climbing some mountain or going to some adventure center, they need to have what's called mixed sex supervision. So there need to be adults with them for the boys and adults with them for the girls. But the problem now is, and this is purely theoretical, I'm not suggesting this is definitely going to happen. This is a theoretical consequence of the policy, to be clear about that. There is the possibility that if I was to rock up as a scouter and I was to say, do you know what, I decided this morning now that my name is Joanna and I have always been a woman and I've been hiding it for years and I'm now a woman, but I look like this and I keep the beard and I keep the kind of like the height and I keep, all the other accoutrements that come with being a man. Scouting Ireland will not only recognize me as a woman, I will count as a woman for the purpose of minding the kids. So, if somebody needs to go into the girls' toilets because somebody's got a problem there with the various things girls can have problems with at that age, I guess, I would be able to go in as a woman, even though I'm a man and decided I was a woman, the last few days. So I put this to Scouting Ireland. I emailed them and I was like, can you give me a statement on this? Can you deny any of this? Can you tell me that the sources were wrong? And I got this statement back. People can read it on Gript. And it was essentially, Scouting Ireland is committed to the equality of outcome for all young people and we're going to continue to be committed to that, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, the statement didn't deny any of the questions, despite me asking twice. What you make of it?
I mean, first of all, knock Scouting Ireland off the list of things that will ever feature in my children's lives. You'll be told, we're constantly told that these kind of situations won't arise, and then they do. And ultimately what it's boiling down to time and time again is that, Bob, who became Mary and now wants to wear a dress, his feelings are more important than the feelings and the comfort of children, the feelings of the comfort of women. And I just object to it in the most strongest of terms, as we know from this podcast. This is maybe a bit controversial, but I don't let my kids stay anywhere without me. So the kind of overnight stuff is not my cup of tea. Now my kids are still a bit young for it. My oldest is 8. And yes, they have been minded by other people, but I would say 99% family, and then a couple of female minders that we use. But they've never stayed anywhere outside the house, except my oldest son stayed overnight in my parents with Keith when his brother was born. Apart from that, they've never stayed anywhere without me. And I think overnights, I'm not comfortable with it. I'm sorry if people don't like that, but
I would have thought that Mr. Childless kind of dink, double income, no kids guy here, but I would have thought that was kind of normal. I would have thought that the overnight stuff wouldn't have started more till they get 12, 13 anyway.
But I wouldn't send my 12-year-old on an overnight with the Scouts without me being there. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't be comfortable with it. I don't know. They're not my family. I don't know these adults. So this will never be a concern for me. But if my child was mad into the Scouts and got really involved in the Scouts and wanted to go on a trip, there's absolutely no way that I would allow my child to go away with somebody who was claiming to be a different gender than the gender they were born in. I'm sorry, just no.
That's very strong statement. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. I just think this stuff it's what you said at the beginning is true. It is prioritizing the feelings of some people over the feelings of others. You make choices. You are always making choices. This is one of those choices that I think is fairly straightforward. Like you,
and by the way, John, sorry to interrupt you, but like it is about choices, right? And if you choose, this is ultimately, what it boils down to for me. There's lots of things that if you choose as an adult to do, remove things from your ability to do. So you're a well-known person. You're known to have certain views. You're the editor of Gript, right? So you appreciate as an adult that means that you're probably not going to be invited to the National Women's Council's luncheon, right?
Yes.
And you accept that. But you also accept that there are people who won't like you, who've never met you, or that there are things that you won't be invited to, or that you might not go to. You might not go for, I don't know, you might not, there's 100 things that it rules out for you. So if you are an adult male, let's just play this out. If you're an adult male who's decided that he's always been a woman and now he wants to be a woman, maybe the Scouts is just not for you anymore. And maybe you just have to accept that. Maybe if you choose to live your life that way, everything you want to do is now not available to you. So do what you like, but maybe not everything is appropriate for you anymore. And why would you want to go as a woman on a weekend away with young people?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, but you just have to be kind of. I'm just suspicious of it, with all due respect to people, and I don't want to, be cruel or, I'm not interested in being like making accusations about. When we're speaking about, there's no person involved here, but there's choices you make as an adult. When you choose one way, it rules out other options for you. And I think if you decide, as a 50-year-old man will say, that you're now going to transition into a woman and you've been involved in the Scouts for years, you might just have to weigh up your options and go, you know what, I choose being Mary over being a Scout leader, and that's the choice I made. But I just am deeply suspicious of somebody who wants to continue that. And then theoretically, you used to go on the Scouts trips and be managing the boys, but now you're managing the girls. Would you go way out of it?
Yeah, I do. Look, I get really suspicious when people start wanting stuff kids. I do. I mean,
Yeah.
It was like a couple of years ago there where we had all these controversies with the drag queen story time or whatever it's called. Remember that? And
Yeah.
I have never heard even once of, and you know what? If I'm wrong, send me in and I'll eat my humble pie on next week's episode of this podcast. If anyone can find me a single record of a drag queen story time, whatever it's been called, being performed in a nursing home for the benefit of elderly people. Like, it doesn't happen. It's always in schools, it's in libraries, it's where kids can be influenced. And I believe, I'm not trying to imply perversion here necessarily, because I think a lot of it is actually about ideological indoctrination. I think it is trying to get, like, to make 6-year-old kids your allies and make them think your drag queens are cool and gay people are cool.
but also some of it has been infiltrated by weird people. The truth is, like, John, the truth is that there are certain things, like, we'll take the trans thing out of it, right? History has shown that swimming, for example, has attracted some weird people.
A lot of weird people.
Yeah, in terms of coaching. Weird men who presented themselves as coaches or as help, whatever. And their primary purpose, or one of their purposes of being there, was to molest children, right? Mm-hmm. So that's nothing to do with trans. That's nothing to do with anything. That's just straight men. And I notice now when I bring my kids to swimming, you can bring kids to swimming now. There's really strict rules about photography. You can't take, there's like a lot of guardianship around kids. I'm in the changing room. It's all very safe. It's all very whatever. And that's because of that. That's because in the past, there's been bad men who have infiltrated into coaching and swimming situations and molested children. So what's wrong with saying, and therefore rules and structures are in place to protect children from potential predatory adults. So now what we're talking about is going, oh yeah, the predator might be okay now that they might be wearing the right outfit. Do you know what I mean? Like, no. There are safeguards in place for situations where children are vulnerable to the adults that are in charge. And the Scouts now saying that those safeguards are all very well, but if the person's feelings might be hurt, it's okay that we abandon some of those safeguards, is absolute bullshit.
Yeah, I think there's another thing here too. Getting away from the whole safety issue. Because I look, I'm not saying you're saying this, But I want to be absolutely clear that we are not saying to the podcast and not suggesting that every transgender person is like in any way affected children.
No, that's not what we're saying. But what we are saying, John, is that for a reason, we don't put men into the girls' changing rooms and we don't put women into the boys' changing rooms.
But this is the point I wanted to make. This is the point I wanted to make, actually, which is about that. It's about that point, which is that if you are a trans woman, i.e. somebody like me, a man who has decided to become somebody like Sarah, a woman, and has grown their hair out, taken hormones, enlarged their breasts, all that sort of stuff. The average child, just like in that parable, The Emperor's New Clothes, is not going to look at you and go, oh my God, that's a woman. They're still going to look at you in almost all cases and go, why does that woman have an Adam's apple? And I don't think it is. I think, particularly in the case of young girls or young boys, that somebody going into their changing room where they feel vulnerable, who they can look at, that they're not going to go, oh, that was a man, but now he has transitioned and now he is a woman. They're going to look at that and go, that is a man in my changing room. I don't feel safe, because kids don't feel safe. And I do not think that, I think it's the classic example of prioritizing one person's comfort over the rights of young people. I find this.
And it's always the same. It's always women who are the ones who carry the cost. I
have to say, I get a lot of emails in every week, right? We get a lot of emails in at Gript. Ever sent one in, we haven't replied. We get literally hundreds every week, alleging various things or some stories. And people, oftentimes, they'll send you in a story and they'll say, I know this is happening and you can't use my name and I can't give you any proof, but I know it's happening. Can you look into it? There's nothing we can do. Right? And sometimes you get emails like this one, like the one I got from the volunteer at Larch Hill. And a lot of times they, to be honest, don't pan out, or it's somebody who's misunderstood something, or it's somebody who's heard something wrong. And so I was basically emailing Scouting Ireland, and Sarah, I promise you, I emailed them both expecting and hoping to get a reply along the lines of, look, I don't know what's been said to you here, but that's not what our policy is. Yeah. Or maybe our policy has been misunderstood, but here it is. And I actually asked them explicitly. I said, can I have a copy of your new draft safeguarding? Because that will confirm it. One way or the other. You got this draft safeguarding thing that you're putting together, that you walked through. So can you send me a copy? No copy. Wouldn't send it. I asked twice for an explanation as to why they wouldn't send it. No explanation. Not even well, it's still in draft format, and nothing. There's no explanation. Just complete refusal to send that document through, and a complete refusal to even countenance maybe things were misunderstood. I put everything that my source said directly to them, both their press office and the head of safeguarding person, and the most I got was a 2-line statement denying nothing and saying this is about equality. Disgrace is my opinion.
Were you surprised? Are you surprised?
Yes, I was. I actually was surprised. I thought, in my naivete, we had gotten past the peak of this stuff. I thought we'd gotten past the peak of it, and that it was likely to ease off. It's kind of like the conversation we had earlier on, where you were like saying, "Oh, I think we're at the peak of all this kind of pornification of the culture, etc., etc." And I think it's going to get worse. Well, I thought we were past sort of peak woke, and we're not. Still going on out there to some extent. And on that, our last topic that I wanted to discuss is kind of related, because the Irish government did a review this week, or announced its review of the prostitution and sex work laws. And surprise, surprise, we got another review from the government basically saying, too lenient, we should introduce reforms to decriminalize prostitution, which I just think is funny in the same week that they're going on about toxic masculinity.
Oh, good. Oh, good. More progress. Yeah, let's make it as easy as possible for a middle-aged man to have sex with a 19-year-old Russian girl, because that'll be good for society.
Look, I understand there are people out there who are libertarians. Well, my friends are very libertarian in this question, who regard this as...
We've had my husband on this podcast. He's a libertarian.
I forgot that he was on this podcast, but I was thinking of him. I obviously didn't want to say, Sarah, but your husband's in favour of legalising prostitution. That would be, but yes, I was thinking of him. But now you've outed him. Keith is in favour of this sort of stuff, not actually partaking in it, but believes it should be legal. So clear. And he and I disagree fundamentally. I think you and he disagree fundamentally, don't you as well?
Yeah. 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 I've worn him down on some of the big topics. You know, I've changed him. We have a mutual friend who often says to me that I've done great work on him, done a great job on him, as if he was something that a rock that needed to be whittled into something more palatable.
He was a fixer-upper when you got him.
To the centre, right? Yeah. So on some of my more fundamental beliefs, I've kind of changed him, but he's not for turning. The lady is not for turning on some of his more libertarian views, and we should have him on again. But I agree. I fundamentally disagree with him on this. But look, I can't get him to empty the dishwasher, so I'm not going to change his mind on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it probably deserves a longer discussion and a longer debate.
Yeah.
We're at the end of the podcast now, so we might park it for another week. But it is just something to note, and we will come back to that topic because I think it's one of those sort of.
I mean, I think I'll just say that it's a good example of what I talk about all the time, which is our unwillingness to have hard conversations about complicated things. And, you know, the government will spend the taxpayer money on doing a review and doing this and doing that, but it will never really get in with any depth to what this is really about, how damaging it is, who it damages, how it could be improved, you know, how vulnerable some of these women are, etc., etc., etc. And it's a symptom of the way we tackle hard topics in general, and it deserves its time, as you say, and it needs a bit more depth of conversation.
It does. A migrant-dominated industry, I believe. Well, in that an awful lot of these women are actually poor women from poorer parts of the world who have oftentimes arrived here, you know, against their will or under false pretenses, and are finding themselves being bought and sold by oftentimes middle-aged, middle-class Irish men. And that's an uncomfortable conversation that people don't really seem to want to have. And who knows why. Anyway, look, we may have it at a later stage when we have more time, but for now, we are out of time. Thank you very much for joining Sarah and I, as always. I do read all the comments. That's how I know that so many of you are loving her and being annoyed at me recently, which is wearing me down, really hurting my feelings, I have to say. But nevertheless, I'm glad that you listened, and I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I hope you enjoy the argument, whose ever side you're on various topics. So that's it from us. We'll be back next week. This has been The Week That Really Was.